How's everybody doing? Hoping you're having a fantastic day. So this is one of my patron-only streams. I usually release a substantial portion first half for those of you who aren't patrons. So you at least get something out of it. I'm not going to kind of tease you and cut myself off in the middle of making an important point. It's going to be a substantial portion. So it's still worth watching, even if you don't want to sign up for Patreon. But if you do, I'm going to be making these. I haven't for a bit due to some personal setbacks. Not really setbacks. Personal busyness, I guess you could say, with the birth of my daughter and a lot of stuff surrounding that and school and everything. But I'm going to be making these again every week. So if you're interested, definitely consider being a patron. You get some other cool stuff. You get to be a member of the exclusive Discord where we actually talk about serious things. I mean, there's some shenanigans that go on, but the shenaniganing is kept to a minimum. And then you also get my annotated Thomist articles. So if you want to read the Summa with some explanatory content that I add in order to aid in understanding the more difficult concepts or to get it summarized in a more intuitive way for you, then you can get access to that. But that is the $10 and up tiers. So, yeah, I really need to fix my tier system, though, because some of those I do, some of those I need to kind of change. Yeah, but that's what it is. But today I wanted to address something interesting because for at least for the patron streams, I guess I can be a little bit more free because this is just going to a select group of people. So I can discuss topics that I otherwise wouldn't really want to discuss for everybody out there to see. So this is going to be responding to some clips that Reason and Theology put up. Our good friend Michael Lofton, if you're watching this, Michael, I actually do want to reconcile. I've said this for a while. I don't have any issues with you. Is all I guess that I'm saying. But I did have some issues with the clips that he put up. He put up these clips from an interview he did a while back on the Orthodox reception of St. Thomas. Very interesting topic. And the scholar in the clip, I believe he's Eastern Orthodox. If I had to, I don't think he's Eastern Catholic, but he says some problematic things. He says some very problematic things about St. Thomas's view of the East. It's just weird. Because if you just look at the direct text of St. Thomas, which I'm going to be showing, there's like dozens of more texts I could have quoted. It's just I had time constraints. I'm not going to do like a 10-hour study day just looking to collect every single text where St. Thomas talks about the Greeks. Sorry, guys. I just collected what I thought was a sufficient representation and of places I knew really off the top of my head. Not anything super duper extensive. But he says some really weird things about the way in which St. Thomas viewed the Greeks. And actually, I've already broken my convention. But when it comes to the title of this, this is worded very carefully. I say St. Thomas, defender of the Oriental Schismatics, ? What in the world do I mean by Oriental Schismatics? I think that there is an issue with equivocation when we are discussing the whole Eastern Catholic shebang. Because sometimes we want to use the words Greek or East or whatever it may be, and you have signified everything from your local ROCOR priest who rebaptizes to some Melkite. you really have such a wide signification with that term that it just becomes really unhelpful. So I prefer Oriental Schismatic because this really does signify those who claim adherence to, or at least descendancy from, the tradition of the East, yet do so in a way which is schismatic, where they don't hold the fullness of the faith of the Greek fathers. But this distinguishes them from Eastern Catholics, which technically, although in practice they unfortunately can sometimes take a route which isn't in accordance with their tradition. But on foundation, they are the legitimate heirs of the uh, Eastern tradition. They're the sons of the Greek fathers, not the Oriental schismatics who St. Thomas is discussing here. So this is sometimes why you can get some weird comments from earlier authors. Like you get St. Thomas at one point talking about how the Oriental schismatics, he doesn't use that language, but the Greeks are damned because of their belief, their rejection of the supremacy of the Roman pontiff. And then in other points, he's talking about the Eastern churches. What we have to recognize in one point, he's talking about those who are of the East that are in communion with the Roman pontiff and in submission to him. And in other points, he's talking about those who are not in communion with the Roman pontiff, those who are schismatics. So equivocation becomes really difficult here. And once we read over some text, it's going to become obvious. But I just wanted to make that distinction right away. I'm not saying like Eastern Catholics bad or anything like that. And I'm also not necessarily saying that when it comes to the later post-schism tradition of the Byzantines, that there's sort of nothing there, and that Greeks kind of should memory hole everything from 1053, although that's a bit, as we know, that's a bit of a arbitrary date, but let's just keep it for pedagogy's sake. 1053 to whenever their body or jurisdiction came back into communion with the Roman pontiff. You don't really have to memory hole that stuff, but you should only receive it, which the good ones do, and they're very honest about it, receiving it as it is in accordance with the tradition that came before, the genuine Greek tradition, and then also those aspects which are in line with the Catholic faith as expressed by the magisterium of the church, whether ordinary, extraordinary, or through certain things like the consensus of the schoolmen. So yeah, that's all my big old introduction for why I want to be a bit more careful about my language here. So I think this is important, and this is something that I've struggled to communicate in the past, and it's led to confusion for some people, where after we just chatted, it was obvious that we basically agreed on everything. So yes. Now, when it comes to the state of the question, the two clips specifically that I'm referring to is the first clip, did Aquinas believe the Eastern Orthodox were without grace? And the second one is, how did Aquinas' view of the Eastern Orthodox? The second one, I think, is a bit more ridiculous. Although the first one, there's a serious issue. I don't know if it's a sort of slip, because sometimes you say things that just are wrong, incidentally, in passing. So it might be one of those things, but he did say it, and our friend Lofton did post it. So you're kind of responsible for that. So the original video is Orthodox Readings of Aquinas with Dr. Marcus Plested. Please, I don't know how to pronounce the name. But basically, if you just kind of watch the first 15 minutes, this is where he discusses it. I went back and I watched the video just to make sure I was receiving everything in context. So there's 3 points, basically. The first is the Greeks have valid sacraments. This is obvious. Anybody who has went through catechesis should be able to tell you they're invalid but illicit. Invalid means that the sacraments still confer grace. Yeah, that's that wasn't exactly the most helpful thing, but sometimes you got to go over the basics. So yeah, they have valid sacraments which give grace. Yep, true. But obviously, when there's certain impediments placed, the grace doesn't take its full effect. This is kind of just basic catechism stuff. So second, this is where we get into the sort of problematic points, because this is what he's representing St. Thomas's belief at. This isn't his own belief, which if this was his own belief, it would be problematic. But again, he's Orthodox, so I'm not really going to hold Dr. Marcus Plested. I'm just going to call him Dr. Marcus with all due respect, because Plested is a very difficult thing to say. So Dr. Marcus. So this is a very problematic thing to hold for Catholics because there is no dividing lines within the one church. There is the one church. And then there are those who have broken themselves off from the one church by either perfect excommunication, formal schism, or formal heresy. And then there's a bit of disagreement on those last 2 points, which I'll get into. But yeah, there's St. Thomas definitely didn't believe this, and I'm going to show from his writings that he didn't believe this. He believed that there was one church, no sort of schisms within going on, no branch theory stuff, which maybe he didn't mean branch theory, but sure seems from what he said that that's what he means. And if he's Orthodox, there's some Orthodox who are kind of ecumenist in that way, so who knows. And then third, he did say that St. Thomas viewed the Byzantines as fundamentally, quote, Orthodox and, quote, Catholic. And he says that St. Thomas took a benign and Irenic approach. And he said that the Greeks and the Latins just needed to get to know one another better. And that St. Thomas wanted to get all of these Byzantine works translated. He kind of at least displayed St. Thomas as having a bit of a, how I describe it as like a happy clappy approach to the East. Didn't really view him as too problematic. Kind of just wanted to do some good old ecumenism there and get to know one another. That's how we represented Aquinas as viewing the contemporary Byzantines. That's important, the contemporary Byzantines. But this third point, I think, was with all due respect, a bit ridiculous. And we're going to see this in the text of St. Thomas, is he viewed this as issues of salvation and damnation, issues of without the church. He didn't view this sort of in an Irenic way, if you want to put it like that. And then he also makes the claim that St. Thomas didn't ever call them heretical, where his contemporaries did, which isn't really right. And we're going to see that St. Thomas clearly thought that the contemporary Byzantines were heretical and that they were schismatic. That's just how we viewed it. There's not really much getting around it. This is really explicit in his writings, which I'm going to show. So when it comes to the first claim, this is obvious. The only sacramental issues that St. Thomas did have was with their practice of confirmation by way of priests, which it doesn't seem like St. Thomas understood the intricate sacramental questions at hand, which is completely fine because a lot of these sacramental questions really were determined a bit later in our reflections on the nature of the sacraments and of canon law. He really, when it comes to like ordinary and extraordinary minister, he didn't really distinguish between the fact that the Byzantines didn't really view their priests as ordinary in the sacramental sense of ordinary ministers of the sacrament, but as extraordinary ministers of the sacrament. This is a distinction which is found in the Council of Trent when they're discussing this issue. So yeah, he had an issue with the way in which they did confirmation. And then he also had an issue with their undue restriction of the proper matter of the Eucharistic host, because they said that it, well, at least some of them said, that it needed to be leavened bread, not unleavened bread, which you can dispute whether the Greeks actually said that, and that's completely fair. But we're not talking about really what the Greeks actually believed. We're talking about what St. Thomas viewed the Greeks as believing and the way in which he evaluated it. That's the whole state of the question. So if I don't give that qualifier, whether the Greeks actually believe that or not, then don't complain, because that's not the state of the question. So the second claim, this is the really big sort of no-no thing that was said. Yeah, this was pretty bad. But so he said that St. Thomas sort of viewed as unnecessary divisions within the one church, the Byzantines and the Latins. You can't hold that there are people within the Catholic Church who are holding to schism, who are schismatic, who are holding to heretical propositions, or who are perfectly excommunicated. And this is the teaching of the Church, but this is also the teaching of St. Thomas, which is more important. And then when it comes to formal schism and formal heresy, I just noted that there's disagreements over whether they need to be manifest or not. But yeah, that's not really to our purpose. So in his commentary on the Apostles' Creed, I think he explains the unity of the Church and how it is unified in a very good way. And I think that when it comes to our friend Michael Lofton, the guest that he brought on, I don't think that he really holds this view, which if he actually does, and I am misinterpreting him, then it is still within the ordinary scope of his words. So maybe there needs to be some sort of clarification. So I think this goes down to, so the church has 4 essential notes. She is one, she is holy, she is Catholic, and is universal. That is universal. She is strong and firm. On the first, it must be known that although various heretics have founded various sects, they do not belong to the church, since they are divided into parts. But the church is one. One is my dove, my perfect one. The unity of the church arises from 3 sources. So notice he believes the church is one. Heretics finding sects, they are not members of the church. First, the unity of faith. All Christians who are of the body of the church believe the same doctrine. I beseech you that you all speak the same thing, that there be no schisms among you, and one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So where there is heresy, there is not unity. Second, the unity of hope. All are strengthened in one hope, arriving at eternal life. Hence the apostle says, one body, one spirit, as you are called, in one hope of your calling. Third, the unity of charity. And this is going to be the breaking by schism. All are joined together in the love of God, and to each other in mutual love. In the glory which you have given me, I have given them, that they may be one, even as also we are one. It is clear that this is true love when the members are solicitous for one another and sympathetic towards one another. This is because each one ought to make use of the grace that God grants him and be of service to his neighbor. No one ought to be indifferent to the church or allow himself to be cut off or expelled from it. For there is but one church in which men are to be saved. Just outside of the Ark of Noah, there is no one could be saved. So cut off or expelled. Again, this is a catechetical work of St. Thomas, who is not using technical terminology. Basically, he's talking about excommunication, breaking by charity, or breaking by heresy, keeping to the whole of the unity of the church. So this is pretty basic, but he's going to, in his actual didactic work, I just took the sections from the Summa, although this is all over his writings. You see first his teaching on schism. It's found in Secunda Secundae, question 39, article 1, and then also article 3. So whether schism is a special sin. So he explains exactly what schism is right here. Although, accordingly, schismatics, properly so called, are those who willingly and intentionally separate themselves from the unity of the church. For this is the chief unity, and the particular unity of several individuals among themselves is subordinate to the unity of the church, even as the mutual adaptation of each member of a natural body is subordinate to the unity of the whole body. Now, the unity of the church consists in 2 things, namely in the mutual connection or communion of the members of the church, and again in the subordination of all the members to the church, to the one head. And then who is this one head? Now, this head is Christ himself, whose vice regent is in the church is the supreme pontiff. Wherefore schismatics are those who refuse to submit to the sovereign pontiff and hold communion with the members of the church who acknowledge his supremacy. So St. Thomas, very, very clear. What does it mean for us to have schism? To not be in submission to the sovereign pontiff, or to hold communion with those who are in submission to the sovereign pontiff. So he's very clear, very, very clear with how he is defining this. So down also to number 3, whether the schismatics have any power. So was this useful? I can't remember whether I thought this was useful or not. Nah, I didn't think this was useful. Yeah, but I didn't think this was useful. Okay, I meant just Article 1. So yeah, submission to the Roman Pontiff broken. That's what he means by broken by schism. Now, when it comes to excommunication, which is the second way in which one could be broken off, look at that. That's in the Supplementum, question 21, Article 1. whether excommunication is suitably defined as separation from the communion of the church as to fruit and general suffrages. He says yes. I just want to get to this one. Whether an excommunication justly pronounced has any effect. I answer that an excommunication may be unjust for two reasons. First, on the part of its author, as anyone excommunicates through hatred or anger, and then nevertheless the excommunication takes effect, though its author sins, because the one who is excommunicated suffers justly, even if the author acts wrongly in excommunicating him. Second, on the part of the excommunication, though there being no proper cause, or though the sentence being through the sentence being passed without the forms of law being observed. In this case, if the errors on the part of the sentence be such as to render the sentence void, this has no effect, for there is no excommunication. But if the error does not annul the sentence, this takes effect, and the person excommunicated should humbly submit, which will be credited to him as merit, and either seek absolution from the person who has excommunicated him or appeal to the higher judge. If, however, he were to condemn the sentence, he would ipso facto sin mortally. Notice, this is very important, even if it's something which is unjust. But sometimes it happens that there is sufficient cause on the part of the excommunicator, but not on the part of the excommunicated, as when a man is excommunicated for a crime which he has not committed, but which has been proved against him. In this case, if he submit humbly, the merit of his humility will compensate him for the harm of the excommunication. Okay, that is just basic, simple. I want to kind of get to all of the meat, but the last one's broken by heresy, which Secunde question 11, article 2, response to the third. And when it comes to the third is the question is whether heresy is properly about matters of faith. The third is, further, we find holy doctors differing on matters of faith. So he's going to distinguish exactly what kind of error of faith is going to cause the fall into heresy. As Augustine says, and we find it stated in the Decretals, by no means should we accuse of heresy those who, however false and perverse their opinion may be, defend it without obstinate fervor, and seek the truth with careful anxiety, ready to mend their opinion when they have found the truth, because, to wit, they do not make a choice in contradiction to the doctrine of the Church. Accordingly, several doctors seem to have differed, either matters of holding of which in this or that way is of no consequence, so far as their faith is concerned, or even matters of faith, which were not yet defined by the Church, although if anyone were obstinately to deny them after they have been defined by the authority of the universal Church, he would be deemed a heretic. This authority resides chiefly in the Roman Pontiff. And then he gives some quotes. Basically, yeah, he's still very clear about the center of unity of the Church being surrounded by the Roman Pontiff, which is this is very clearly that point on which the Greeks have erred. So just kind of looking at his principles, the statement which was made, what was exactly the statement? That the schism is an unnecessarily dividing line within one church. It's very clearly not St. Thomas's position when it comes to the nature of schism, heresy, and excommunication. Okay, now the third claim. The third claim is that he viewed the Byzantines as fundamentally orthodox and Catholic, that St. Thomas was benign and irenic, and that we just need to get to know one another better, and that he loved to get the works of the Byzantines translated. Well, fundamentally, this rests upon an equivocation. And this equivocation is that there's a distinction between, and this is something that St. Thomas consciously did distinguish, although not always in his terminology, distinction between, on the one hand, Byzantine theology as present in the Greek fathers, and is said to be contemporarily Byzantine insofar as the Byzantines retain that tradition of the Byzantine fathers. And on the other hand, the falling away of the Byzantine tradition in certain points against the Byzantine tradition itself, and also against the Catholic faith, generally speaking. So Byzantine can be used in two ways. In the context, the gentleman who was speaking, Dr. Marcus, he meant the post-schism beliefs of the Byzantines. That's what was meant. Number two was meant, the falling away of the Byzantine tradition. That's what was meant. But when St. Thomas shows a positive appreciation of the Greeks, He means number one. He means the teaching of the Greek fathers, which is seen all throughout Contra Erroris Graecorum when he is opposing the authority of the Greek fathers to the Greeks. Clearly, Greek is being used in two different senses there. One, to the Greek tradition authentically received into the Eastern Catholic churches today and also appreciated by the Latins. And on the other hand, the Greeks as those who have broken communion with the Roman pontiff and have developed in a false way. So, well, look at that. This is clearly shown forth in the treatise Contra Erroris Graecorum, against the errors of the Greeks, or other translations will have on the Catholic faith of the Greek fathers, which actually is a more, ironically, that sounds like it'd be the happy clappy title, but it's actually a more accurate title because most of the work is just showing how the Greek fathers, or at least what Nicholas of Durazzo thought was the Greek fathers, actually are in line with the Latin way of stating things. So the first book deals with a bunch of texts cited, and St. Thomas is showing how the language of the Greek cited are not against the teaching of the Latins. So basically showing in the first book that number one agrees with Catholicism. That is, that Byzantine theology is present in the Greek fathers and retained in some part by contemporary Byzantine authors. He's showing that number one is not against Catholicism. And then in book two, he shows that number two, that is the falling away of the Byzantine tradition, is against the faith of the Greek fathers. So number two is against number one. That is what St. Thomas dealt with in book two of Contra Erroris Graecorum. And number two is seen on 4 points. This is consistent throughout his writings. I did gather a few more quotes. You can check them in your free time. I cite what the areas are, but this video is already getting a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be. So their 4 points is, number one, their lack of submission to the Roman pontiff, which St. Thomas says is absolutely necessary for salvation. Second, their denial of the filioque, which St. Thomas says is absolutely necessary for salvation. Third, their denial of purgatory. I think St. Thomas calls this an article of faith, but he doesn't explicitly say it's necessary for salvation, but again, that's implicit. And the last one is their denial of unleavened bread as matter in the Eucharist, which he says this is derogatory to the honor of Christ, but he doesn't say that this is absolutely necessary for salvation. This is more of just a bit of a narrow point in sacramental theology. So, okay, so simply speaking, this isn't going to be something which is going to be destructive of the virtue of faith, but secundum quid, that is, relatively speaking, it's going to destroy belief in the validity of the Latin tradition, the authority of the Roman pontiff, and other issues that are going to make it destructive of faith if you say that unleavened bread cannot be used in the Eucharist. But continuing. So in general, I'm just going to quote the general statement from Contra Erroris Graecorum, Book 2, Prologue. So he says, I need to make the screen bigger for myself because I'm basically blind. After these explanations, then, we proceed now to show how on the basis of the authorities contained in the aforementioned book, the true faith is taught and defended against error. It is to be kept in mind that the Son of God appeared precisely in order to destroy the works of the devil, as stated in 1 John 3:8. Hence, he has exerted and continues to exert his every energy in the opposite direction to destroy the works of Christ. He attempted to do this initially via tyrants who inflicted bodily death on the ministers of Christ, subsequently, however, via heretics, through whom he worked the spiritual death of many. Hence, on careful examination, the errors of heretics appear tending mainly to diminish the dignity of Christ. And then he lists all of the heretics that diminish the dignity of Christ. Now he's going to list other heretics which diminish the dignity of Christ, and namely the Greeks. This doesn't really sound like a, quote, Irenic and like a humanist, just wanted to get to know each other better sort of approach, because he's like, okay, here's the Arians, Nestorians, Sabellians. Oh, yeah, and now here's the contemporary Greeks who diminish the dignity of Christ. Like that's just not like the sort of happy-clappy approach that we're going to want it to be. St. Thomas very clearly views the Greeks as heretics, schismatics, and excommunicated from the church. And he lists the exact reasons why he thinks that these are such. So, continuing. So also at the present time, some are described as dissolving Christ by diminishing his dignity, so far as this lies in their power. In saying that the Holy Spirit does not proceed from the Son, they lessen his dignity, since he, together with the Father, is the spirator of the Holy Spirit. In denying, moreover, that there is one head of the Church, namely the Holy Roman Church, they clearly dissolve the unity of the mystical body. For there cannot be one body if there's not one head, nor one congregation if there's not one ruler. Hence John 10:16 says, there will be one fold and one shepherd. In denying the sacrament of the altar can be consecrated of unleavened bread, they are manifestly in opposition to Christ, who, as the evangelists relate, instituted this sacrament on the first day of the unleavened bread, when it was against the law for there to be leavened bread in the houses of the Jews. Their views also seem to diminish the purity of the sacramental body of Christ, to which the apostle exhorts the faithful in 1 Corinthians 5:8, saying, let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and envy, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. In denying purgatory, they also lessen the power of this sacrament, which is offered in the church both for the living and the dead. For if purgatory does not exist, it avails the dead nothing. It cannot profit them if they are in hell, where there is no redemption, nor can it do them good if they are in heaven, where there are no need of our prayers. So this is just the introduction to the work where he's outlining, but it's very clear already here. And then now we're going to be getting into the specific statements, looking throughout his corpus, looking throughout the work, looking where he actually does say that these things are necessary for salvation. And this is the point where I'm going to cut off the stream for everybody. So if you do want to see the rest of this stream, go to patreon.com/militantthomist and become a patron. $5 and above are going to get access to the full stream.